Vince is a good friend, and when Vince and I get together and talk, it's a good thing we do it on a weekday, and he has to go back to work because otherwise I would just not stop talking with Vince ever. So be very afraid for this podcast. So Vince, you've shared a number of things with me that happened in your life, and as we're talking about encountering God on this podcast, I wanted to ask you if you'd mind sharing how you encountered God in one of the lowest, most difficult times in your life.
Absolutely. So I had been married for roughly 8 years, had a good marriage. I was in a profession that took a lot of my time. It was very stressful. Uh, I slowly began to drink, slowly began to not spend so much time at home. And I'm sure everybody knows where this is about to go, but I eventually fell into an infidelity. Obviously, it totally tore my family apart. So as I'm continuing to carry this face, the people around me probably thought I was cool or had it all together, but on the inside, it was chaos. It was the best way I can describe it is my soul was being ripped out of my body. It really was. It was so terrible. So had an infidelity. My wife at the time, we separated for a while. We ended up coming back together after Hurricane Michael. Was able to kind of get that out of the way. We were trying to fix things, trying to mend it. And then my grandfather tragically took his own life. So the drinking starts again, and the same terrible cycle goes right back into place, fall into more infidelities. Because I feel like I'm self-righteous, and didn't want my wife at the time to suffer, I divorced her. And again, during that time on the inside, it's chaos is the best way I can describe it. So
Vince, could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So at this time, were you already a follower of Jesus?
Yes. Quick background. I was raised in church. I've been to every vacation Bible school, been a part of it. I've helped when I was in youth. I led the youth group, played in the band. My parents were I wouldn't say they were religious, but they were believers. They really did believe in Jesus, and they really did believe, truly what the message is. It was never, I would feel like a religious practice for us. Like, we were a family of believers. So my whole life had been that.
So the issue wasn't that you didn't know right or wrong. The issue was you allowed yourself to make choices that ended up in destruction.
Absolutely. Well, the issue is pride and my own arrogance, because I thought that, it wasn't this big event that occurred that led to all these issues. It was little things. It was little things I allowed to come into my life. These little things slowly it's like a snowball. It started out small, and then by the time we get to the bottom of the mountain, it's a full-on avalanche. So it was definitely my own arrogance and pride that got in the way.
All right. So once you were, as you said, at the bottom of the mountain, describe where you were and how God met you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give a little bit of parody. Like I said, on the world side, the world looking at it, they probably thought it was cool because, you got this life of this profession. There's women in the life. There's all these different things. At the time, I had a really big project going on. It was very exciting. Not a lot of people get to participate in things like that. But on the inside, it was absolutely terrible. And I had made a decision one day. I had come back from drinking. I came back to my house, and I just said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And I just, I tore my family apart. I had 2 small children, and I thought about all the damage I had done to them, my ex-wife, and all that I had put her through. I'm like, ultimately, I just, I'm a piece of trash. I don't need to be here anymore. So I sat down, and at the time, I had a really good friend, and I kind of alluded to him what I was about to do cryptically. I said, hey, look, these are what you need to do. And I'd written out this letter to everybody. And again, it's all woe is me, because all I was focused on was Vince. Like, I'm sorry I wasn't good enough. I'm sorry. As I went back and read, I'm like, man, this is a selfish letter that I wrote, and trying to, I guess, give myself a good light at the end. Maybe, I don't know. But so I was sitting there. I'd written the letter out. I'd kind of given the instructions to my friend of like, hey, don't let this, you need to be the person to come here at this time. Only you. And that was that. So I'm sitting there, and I had a gun in my hand, and I said, you know what, this is it. And it's weird that you think about things, because I was like, well, maybe I don't want to be too much of a coward not to do this. Sitting here calmly, so I was thinking, and I know this is going to sound graphic, but I was like, if I punch myself really hard in the chin, it'll force this to go off, and that'll take care of the rest.
So you had the suicide was not just a thought that you had a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I had dedicated, this is what was going to happen. So I sat down. At the time I was living on Thomas Drive, I had a condo on the beach. I remember looking out, watching, as theatrical as this sounds. I'm like, I'm going to enjoy my last sunset, So I go sit on the edge of the bed, got my gun. And then there was this moment, and I remember it was like somebody threw a weighted blanket on me, and it was like inside of my heart, it was like enough. And that's kind of been a theme in my life, because I've always struggled with being enough. And it was weird that it was like, it wasn't an audible voice. I want to make that very clear. It was just in my spirit. It was like enough. And it was like this warm embrace that just held me there. And I don't know that I could have picked that gun up and put it towards my head, because it was just such a force. It was just kind of sitting on me. And then in that moment, I just began to cry. I was like, what did I do? And it was like everything. It's like I snapped out of a trance almost. And I was like, what am I doing? It's like, it scared me at first. I was like, what am I doing? So, I put everything away. I was like, whoa, I got to start fixing this. So I grabbed my Bible, and I just started reading. Like, I just started reading in John. I don't even remember what I was just like, I want Jesus to talk to me. And I know that the best way for him to speak to me is through his word. And so that's kind of what I started to do.
Wow. So how long ago was this, Vince?
2021, somewhere in there. I remember it because I came to you, and this is not going to make me look very flattering, but at the time, I'd been at Northstar for a long time, and I thought of Roy as like it was all about him. And then after I'd had my experience with God, I was like, man, I need to start making some things right. And I just happened to see Roy, and this is how I know when God speaks to me. It's like a subtle pull on the heart, and it was something was pulling me towards you. So I said, all right, God, I'm not going to ignore it. And I went up and I apologized. And Roy's never probably had a conversation with me at that point in life.
This was our first conversation. Yes. You opened with, go ahead.
Roy, I just, nice to meet you. My name is Vince, and I want to apologize because I judged you, and who am I to be judging? And Roy handled it with such grace. I was thinking, he could just let me have it, but he didn't. And it kind of, I think I remember it very vividly. Roy said, I'm actually way worse. And I was like, we can be friends, because I like transparency and I enjoy authenticity.
Well, that I am sure of. No matter how badly anybody sees me, I am much worse than that. So it's been a few years. Was it like, so you had this encounter with God that was very, visceral and experiential, and it, brought you to his word. And so was it just like, everything's fantastic now, or was there a process? And if so, after that initial encounter where God found you there kind of at the bottom of the mountain, like you described, what was it? Was there anything that you began to shift in your kind of just daily life that brought you farther and farther back? Obviously, one thing you mentioned is to go back and to talk with people that maybe you had judged or had problems with. Anything else?
Yeah. So just to make it very clear to everyone, it's not, there's never like this snap and it's all better thing. You begin to have to do things like, so God showed me the door, and he said, all right, you have a choice here. You can lay here in your filth, or you can walk this way. It's not going to be easy, but you can change. And I'll show you my power, because I'll make a negative a positive. So that's what I began to do. You were the first interaction. There was other people I went to and just said, hey, look, I need to apologize to you for the things I had done. And I began to set up a network or system around me of people like Roy and Trent. And I've got other people, like I call them my spiritual bullpen, if you will. And these people that could hold me accountable, allow me to be edified, allow me to have good conversations about Jesus. And so I began with those disciplines and spending time with those people. And it's not an instantaneous change. It's not like all of a sudden I was just better. But I knew I was making progress to become better. And I don't know that you ever arrive per se. I think it's all more about the journey than the destination. And as hard as that time in my life was, I wouldn't trade it for anything, for the fact of what God did and what he led me through, which has allowed me to pour into other people's lives, which is ultimately what I think it's about, is taking care of everyone else. If you can get the focus off of you, like I told you before the podcast started, we're a little speck on a little speck on another little speck in a time of a little speck. And if you really can see yourself that way, man, it really opens up your focus on what's important.
Mm-hmm. So I want to say a couple things, and one of the things I want to say is, if you have a question for Vince or something you'd like to add in the chat or in a comment, go ahead and do that. We'll get to those that we can. If not, we'll try to get back to the comments and make sure we respond to you. But two things I want to mention. One, if you are considering suicide, taking your own life, I want to encourage you, talk with somebody, and not just cryptically, but be honest with them. If you don't have somebody like that, you can dial 988 anywhere, anytime, 988, and there'll be someone there ready to talk with you about what you're going through. So please don't follow through with that decision. In fact, this podcast that you're listening to right now might be your Vince experience that he had in his room to encounter God. We encounter God in so many different ways. And I want to also point out that we often encounter God, especially if we're followers of Jesus already, because in our lives we have sought him. And even though Vince wasn't seeking God at that moment, he had. And God met him. He saw that. And so he encountered God. And so I want to encourage you to focus on seeking God. If you will go to Northstar.Church/encountering God, and that link is in the chat. We'll put it in the comments as well. Northstar.Church/encountering God. You can go there and we will help you to encounter God, to learn how to encounter God on a regular basis with someone else. So just want to check here and see if there are any questions that are in yet that we want to respond to. Pastor Delbert, Alicia, Erica, Jerry, it's great to have you guys. Thanks for joining us. And I just want to thank everybody for being with us. Each episode is a little different. Some people have encountered God, in a room with a gun, and some people have encountered God reading an email. How God meets us is different. But what we need more than anything else is for God to meet us.